All right. Hello, everyone. Today, we are going to be talking about importing plans in bulk into Enfos and adding this planning information via import files for either a single plan or many plans at the same time. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know that this is being recorded. And after the meeting today, you will receive a very short survey, 1 or 2 questions survey, and feel free to please answer that. It does help us. It helps us prepare for our next webinars, and we hope that everyone is finding all of these valuable. All right, so let's get going on it. I'm going to talk about these items again. Webinar is being recorded as always. You're in listen only mode, but you do have this question and answer tab and the chat box. And we have someone on the call who is going to be answering questions along the way. So feel free to answer any of these questions. One of the really important things is after today's webinar, this recording will be emailed out to you. And the slide deck is going to be emailed out to you. And that is especially important because today's slide deck includes step-by-step instructions written out. And we are not going to just read through the slide deck during the webinar today. We're going to do a live demo in addition to the slide deck. So the slide deck is really important. If you're listening to this webinar as a recording, contact Enfos support for a copy of the slides. And I do want to note just one other thing. We already have recorded webinars that overlap with this one. And all of those previous Enfos webinars can always be found on the Enfos YouTube page for your review. 2 that I think are really important that overlap with today. We have a consultant super users, which talks about exporting and importing proposals and invoices. We also have an advanced search webinar, and we're going to be using advanced search today to pull out some of that information. All right. My name is Tori Behrens. I'm going to be leading the webinar today. I am supported by Alexa Russell. I could not be doing this webinar without her today. She has very much supported all the content you're seeing on every slide, but also will be answering the questions and answers along the way. All right, so I love this webinar topic because it's a process that the Enfos team does, right? We use this process when we are doing planning in Enfos, when we're doing implementations and data migration. And we want to empower our users to make the most out of our bulk tools. I know you're going to be able to do this, and we definitely have tips and tricks that we're going to talk about to make it easier. Lessons learned that the Enfos team has come across as we've done this. The goal is going to be exporting a plan, an example plan, where you have basically built yourself a template, making edits in Excel, and then re-importing that back into Enfos. And we're going to start with a single plan at a single AOC, but at the end, we'll talk about scaling it up and doing bulk data migration for many AOCs at the same time. So we're going to talk, about Enfos, but we're also going to talk a little bit about Excel. And I'm going to start with some basics, some overview, and then we're going to get into Enfos and do a live demo. So, this importing, it is considered advanced because you're leaving Enfos and leaving Enfos from the user interface, and then you're working in Excel. To do the importing, you have to have a valid, active Enfos user account with the correct permissions. And I can't change your permissions. Your Enfos administrator has to change your permissions. So if this is something you want or need, or maybe there's an additional person on your team that needs this, be sure to contact that Enfos admin. We're going to look at the import formats. I'm going to show you where those are. Everything needs to match that. You have your own user preferences. We also have another webinar where we talk all about your own user preferences, and I have a little screenshot here of your user preferences. But keep in mind, there's a couple of these user preferences that will impact the format you see in your data import. So keep that in mind as you're doing importing for the first time. This date format and then your comma separated value or CSV delimiter will impact how your file works. We cannot import documents or plan forms, but we're going to talk about how to update that data. And we're going to be importing the data into a editing status, which will allow you to continue to make some edits. And we can continue to use our action items. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can do our action items. That really has a bigger impact when you do bulk importing. All right. So here from this process steps, we are going to leave our PowerPoint. You can see I do have lots of steps here. We got lots of slides that we have in the background, and we are going to move into Enfos. So I'm going to escape out of here. There we go. We are in Enfos. And as always in our webinars, we're using a demo system. And all the data I'm looking at here is fictitious data. And I want to start, and I want everyone to start who might be following along with this webinar, to find a great example plan, right? To have one that you've already built in the user interface. And we're going to use this as our template to build off of and to build new plans from. So I have my example here in Juno. I've got my plan ID. And when I click on this plan ID, this is a really great plan that I've built out previously. I've got all of my summary information. I have contacts. I have plan details with multiple rows in my work breakdown structure. I have some columns in here that might not be in your file, right, in your system. The way that your import works is definitely dependent on your system settings and configurations. This is how my system is set up. And then finally, I have planned or forecasted dollar amounts from the current year forward out into the future. Now, what we're going to do is take this plan and we're going to use this as our template to build out what we can do, to build out and add this import. This export is going to export the data as these numbers, just as we see them today, not the balance, but the planned amount by cell. Okay, so I want to talk about first something that I don't recommend. And at the top of this page, we do have an export. And I do not recommend using this export. And that's because I think there's an easier way to do it. This export does not match the import format. So I want to use an export that does match the import format. So all I need to do is copy my plan ID. And that's this Enfos generated number at the top of the page. I've copied that number. If you are still on your planning landing page, that ID is also shown here in the first column. I've got my number copied. I have my good example plan that I'm going to build my template off of. And now I'm going to go to one of my favorite pages in Enfos, and that is the advanced search page. As I mentioned a little earlier, I have a whole webinar on this advanced search. If you're not using it today, watch that webinar, start using it. It's awesome. It's great for a lot of different actions in Enfos. I've selected the finance module and then the search module for planning in my drop-down menus. And, there's lots of options here. We'll talk about these a bit more when we get to the scaling up portion. But all I want to do is use one field, and that one field is my plan ID. All I'm going to do is paste in my plan ID number right into that cell. And at the bottom of the page, I am going to click search. That gives me my only result for that plan that we just looked at. Now, I don't even need to do much here. All I have to do is click this download at the top of this table. When I click download, I get this in-screen pop-up. And just for this planning page, you get more options than you do if you're on another page in the advanced search. And instead of leaving the selection as it's defaulted with the as shown, we're going to make the selection for the planning data import. And this planning data import is going to export the data in our import format and make it super simple for us to take that, use it as a template, and build off of it. What I love about this is it uses it as specific to this project, specific to this information. So even though my data on my screen is slightly different, what you're going to see on your screen is going to match your formats and your specifications. So let me show you what this does. It exports the data, and now I am no longer in Enfos. I am in Excel. Now, since we're out of Enfos, there's more to consider. There's more to think about it with these Excel options. And it takes it out of Enfos. Some of you know where we're going with this already, but I want to tell you because it's really lessons learned, it's best practices, it's ways that we know your importing is going to be easier. Now, my export has a lot of these columns. I'm going to show you the import next, the import format next, but I wanted to talk about Excel first. Many of these fields, right, are exporting exactly with the same values we're going to need for the import. But there's a few that I want you to be aware of. Enfos requires the import to be in CSV or text file format. That's how it exports. With CSV, it does some things. CSV does some things. So some of the examples is it might strip out leading or trailing zeros, right? So for example, if I type in 024, it's going to remove that leading zero. So just really be aware about that. If you do need something with a leading zero, make sure to use that apostrophe symbol, and then that'll help you retain those leading or trailing zeros. Sometimes it will lose or convert special language characters. So keep that in mind, especially if you're doing importing for a site or a project with a special character. We see those, of course, with some of our international projects. The best way to retain those special characters is to save your file as a UTF-8, and that ensures those characters are preserved. Another thing that we see happen with CSV a lot is our date formats, and you can see that here. In both my maybe effective date, maybe there's a few other dates in there, it will lose those leading zeros. So again, I want to suggest using that apostrophe, and then it will retain your leading zeros. You can also use your custom date formatting to ensure this correct format. Now, remember from what we said on a slide earlier, this format that's required in your dates is going to match what's in your user preferences. Now, I know most of you have day, month, year, so that's what I'm showing here, but it might be different. So really make sure that matches your own user preferences. We're going to look at the format in a moment. All right, watch for scientific notations. If you have very large planned numbers, those might default into a scientific notation format, so make sure to watch that. There's also a difference between a zero and a nothing or a blank, right? So watch your empty versus your zero. Those are two different values. Enfos will not export a dash, but I do know, and I've seen some of your formats from other systems, maybe you're exporting from a different system. If it is a zero or a blank, it might export as a dash. So just be sure to remove those dashes. Any of these amount fields, they should be stored as currency or general, not text fields, right? We're not going to preserve the commas or the symbols. And as always, just be very careful with CSV if you're opening it, editing it, saving it, and then closing it, and then reopening, because you're going to keep losing those leading zeros or some of these other format things. So what we do is we actually keep our files open. And then as we go through error processing, if you keep your file open after you save it, it retains this special formatting you do in CSV. So our goal, right, is to help you make sure a CSV can work for you. And these CSV things that, Enfos cannot control, you can work through them as easy as you can. So we've got a list of those in our slide deck, which is going to be included. All right, let's talk about the import format. I keep kind of citing this import format. I want to show you where this is in Enfos. So we're going to go down to administration and then to transfers. And then we're going to make the selection third from the bottom for me is file import. You may see different options in yours because you might have less permissions than I do. But you want to make that selection for file import. And this is going to take you to the page in Enfos where all of the bulk data importing happens. This is the page we use when we do all the data migration or implementations for new clients. So all of the data in Enfos can be imported here. We want to look at a very specific import format, which we're talking about today. That, again, is under Finance. And we are going to make the selection for planning data. Now, this page that I'm showing, this file import page, this is where we're going to load the file. But what we want to do first is look at the import format. And you can see there's 3 buttons here at the top of the page. File import is where we load the file. Import logs shows us all of the files that had been imported previously, as well as the error logs. So those are really helpful. And then import formats. This is where we show what the format is, what the valid values that are expected are, and how your import file should work. All right. So I'm going to scroll down and we see for this system setup, we see what the column headers are in the name, as well as the description. And these descriptions, these are valid values that have to match exactly. We can download a template, which downloads the column headers, or we can download the format, which downloads the information we see on this page. But because we already have our example plan, we're already ahead of it, right? We've got our template that not only has the column headers, but it also has data content populated for each of the columns. So it really makes it even easier for you. All right. Just note, if you are having problems along the way, this is a great page to go back to. The information on this page is not static either. Your Enfos administrators can change this data. They can update valid values. They can add or deactivate existing valid values. So there might be changes over time. So what you did last quarter might fail in a future period if there are changes. You can always talk to your Enfos administrators on that. But I will say, for the most part, there aren't too many changes going on here for most clients. It does stay pretty static. All right. If you don't have access to this page, that means you don't have access to import the data. And again, you want to talk to your Enfos administrator to make sure you get access to this page if you want to be doing importing. All right, let's take our export and let's start to convert it into what we want, the changes we want to import it. So again, here's my export. I've got 2 rows of data and I want to make some changes. And I've actually already started to build those out so you don't have to watch me enter cell by cell data. Not save that one. All right, great. So I've taken that with my import and I've added in additional rows. Now, what's going to make a row unique? What are the primary keys? It's the combination of your node path, which you can see here is the same for each of my 4 rows. And then the work breakdown structure. And in Enfos, that could be the phase and activity, phase activity component. You might have custom names like the level or the task or the description. So it's going to be whatever those custom names are. But the combination of the WBS as well as the node path is going to make a row unique. If I have a duplicate, maybe I tried to put assessment in here twice, I'm going to get an error saying row 6 and row 1 are, or excuse me, row 2 and row 6 are duplicates, and you have to combine them. So keep that in mind. That's also a future slide note on common errors. All right, so we want to make sure that here's some notes on what to do with that export. Any previous planning periods that are prior to your effective date, right? So my effective date is January 1st of 2024. My first planning year is 2024. If my export included data from 2022 or 2023, I want to make sure to delete those columns because I'm going to get an error if I try to import data that predates my effective date, right? So that your effective date is saying you're planning from this day forward. Make sure those amount columns are from that effective date forward. I'm going to talk about some of these rows or we talked about the rows that made it unique. I want to talk about some of the rows that have the same data on every row. And if I look at my expense type, scenario type, plan comment, plan reason, initiator, cost or recovery, these rows should be the same for every row in your plan. That also includes what we're going to see later here in the effective date and the effective time. It must have the same value for all the rows in a single plan. And if you think about Enfos and this import file works the same way as it does in the user interface, these fields and these values are all set up on that summary page. And so those fields are set regardless of how many rows you might have in your plan. Now, there is one field that you do need to convert, and that's this effective time. If your effective date is today, you can leave that blank, but if your effective date is in the past, you want to use your effective time as either a 1 or a 2. And if I look at my import format, I see for this effective time, a 1 means the start of day and the 2 means the end of day. So be sure to use that field. I know the export is going to export a time, maybe 12 o'clock a.m. Just make sure to convert that effective time into a 1 or a 2, or you're going to get an error. All right, my planned amounts. Here's my years, my out years. I go out for 10 years, so I go out for 2034. Your out years might go farther. So make sure to keep that in mind, as you're doing this. You might also plan by month or quarter or year. That can match this. Enfos can also do the math, right? So if you are planning by month and you have a column for 2024, Enfos will just take that number and divide it by 12. Plan numbers. These can be positive, negative, 0, or blank. And let me add in an example of a negative here. Let me put my indicator in. There we go. Positive, negative, 0, or blank. These can all be imported. Make sure to keep in mind, that these are not the text fields, not with the, they can be the currency or the general format. If you are importing a net present value plan, make sure your numbers are nominal, non-discounted, just as they are in the user interface. Now, if you want to add additional WBS rows, I suggest copying the whole row and just inserting another row. That's going to copy over as much of the data as you already have. You would need to add in a new WBS row. Maybe this is 0, test. And then you can go through the amounts and update the data. I know that valid value is not a valid, not a valid option, so I'm actually going to delete that row before we import it. All right, so we've got our amounts. I do want to talk about one field here that I have blank, and that's this initiator. Now, if you leave it blank like me, it's going to default to the person who is doing the importing. But you can actually set this up as someone else. And if you do this, it can show up on their user preferences on their action items. And that means it can really help with submitting plans in bulk or reviewing plans in bulk. So keep in mind this initiator can be a really powerful tool, especially if you're someone importing plans for many of your project managers. You can add that project manager email address in as that initiator. All right, so just a reminder, we do export the data just as exactly as it's planned, not the balance. So you want to make sure you've got your data in. What we're going to talk about is importing this data in a test system. And the test system then allows you to see the data in there. You can continue to make edits. You can delete it. You can play around with it. And you can, use that test system, especially as you're learning how to do these imports prior to loading the data into production. Now, we typically recommend using an integration system. That's a weekly copy of your production data. But here I am, it's a Wednesday, and my spend is coming in every day, right? I've got more invoices coming in. So keep in mind, if you do import your data in an integration system, that there might be some slight differences, especially with the adjustment compared to when you load the data in production. As you get more skilled and more comfortable importing this data, you can import it directly into production because the data goes in to Enphos in an editing status. And that's very helpful. We're going to look at that in just a moment. All right. I'm going to check my notes here. Let's take our plan and let's import this into our system and make sure, first off, we save this as a UTF-8. I'm going to do that one more time and show everybody here. Make sure you save this CSV UTF-8. That's going to be the best practice for the file type. All right. So let's take this data and let's import it. I'm going to go to my File Import tab. It does retain that module and the type of the finance and the planning data. But what we're going to do is we're going to select our file. And there's my file. I'm going to click Save. And when Enphos processes the file, we check multiple things, right? We check that the column headers are all there correctly, and then we start checking the contents. Now, in this example, you can tell I prepared. I had it all in. It imported successfully. If I did have errors, I'd receive a very clear error message. We're going to talk about the errors in just a moment. But I want to first show you that the next step, and that's reviewing the plan in Enphos. So I'm going to go back to our planning landing page. And here we go. Here is our editing plan that we just imported together. You can see Enphos is calculating an adjustment, how much more or less I'm asking for. I can click on this ID, and you can see on every page, I still have an edit button. So I could, if I saw something wrong, I could click edit here and make changes. But if I also see something wrong, maybe that tells me I should go back to my import file and make those changes. So I can review the summary information with those plan comments, the initiator, other fields like that. Then I can look at my plan details. I imported 4 rows. I see 4 rows. One thing I do want to note, the import file is really great at organizing your WBS. I know many of you want to see your phases and your work breakdown structure in a specific order. If you sort that in Excel, Enphos will retain that when we do the importing. So I wanted to see mine as 1, 2, 3, 4. I imported it that way. That's exactly as I see it. I see my amounts in my cells here that imported. And then the last thing I see here is that my history, right? The plan was imported and it's in the editing status. From here, I can, just as I did, continue to make edits. I would need to add any plan form data. So some of you have required plan forms. And if there's required information, you would need to come into your action items, click the form, and populate that form information. That also includes backup documents. So if you need to load a backup document, click that form and load up your backup document here. But once you're happy with it, once you're happy with your plan, maybe you load it up in your production system or you keep using in your test system. Once you're happy, you want to click submit. And that's your, submitting that onto the client for their review. If you are the client or you are a PM, You could even start your review process, right? But you want to make sure to take that action to do the review and approval or the submit to the review and get that imported. Now, as I mentioned earlier, on your action items, depending on the statuses you have defaulted in your user preferences for your action items, you can see this editing plan here in bulk. And you can go right from your action items to that form page to load those backup documents, or to the review or the submit or the edit. And you also have bulk actions here. So if there are no additional requirements in your plan form, you can do a bulk action right from this imported plan to bulk approve or bulk submit or bulk reject. So keep that in mind. This can make it really fast. If I have 10 plans I need to import, I'd see all 10 of them on my action items. I could bulk review them and send them all on to my next approver. I made it look really easy, right? We imported the data, it's loaded here. We did it for one AOC. Of course, we could do it for many, but I want to talk about some common errors and things that you might come across as you're importing it. You want to always verify that if you do have an error, that it matches the format. That format shown here in the file import page. Let's select our finance planning data. Believe me, we've done this many times, even internally, where we say, how come this isn't working? And, you know, maybe there's a typo in our expense type or something. So just always double check that format. We want to make sure every row has a planned amount, even if it's 0. You cannot import blank rows with no planning data. Our import process checks the column headers first, then it moves to the contents. So there could be multiple rounds of errors, and just make sure you're checking that easy error first. All right, this is a good one, and this one really starts to get into the bulk process. Here we are for our probable and estimable. I already have one here in the editing status. If I tried to import another plan for probable and estimable, I'm going to get an error at this AOC, and it's going to tell me you already have one in editing status. And, you know, maybe it's editing or reviewing or pre-approved. You've got to do something with this one. It either has to be deleted or fully approved before you can import another one. You also cannot predate effective dates. So my effective date is January 1st, and then again, January 1st, 1 second later. I cannot import a probable and estimable plan for 2023. I'm going to get an error. You can only import from January 1st and forward. And then, you know, finally, many of our clients have checks on the planned amounts, and those planned amounts must cover any open purchase orders or any open spend occurring after that effective date. You could get an error message saying your plan is not high enough. It doesn't cover your purchase orders or your spend after that effective date. So keep that in mind too. Enfos is going to be checking the conditions that are set up in the system to make sure that it matches. And ultimately, this import is going to work the same way as the user interface. So make sure that it matches exactly. All right, Enfos, you know, we've gone through it multiple times too. So we know what to do here. Your admins, many of them are already doing this. So they're pretty knowledgeable here as well. All right, so let's go back into our slide deck. And I want to come down here. Many of these notes here are listed. I want to talk about scaling up. So let me get back in here. Great. So we've done it for a single AOC. You've looked at it in the screen, in the editing status, and then maybe, you know, you review it and fully approve it in Enfos. Now you want to scale up. And instead of doing one AOC, you want to do your whole portfolio. You can continue to use advanced search to export all of your current planning information, but you can also use the plan export report, and that's under reporting under the financial planning module. Either of those help you export it in bulk. The reason I like advanced search is because it exports exactly Whereas the plan export report, you've got some columns you've got to delete before you import it. And that's okay, right? It's very minor. And maybe those columns are really helpful. One of the columns in the plan export report shows you the spend. And if you've got the spend, then you're going to have a better idea what your balances are. So, they work differently. If I talk to everybody here at Enfos, I think I'd have it split between which ones they prefer. I like advanced search because it matches. That report criteria is going to really help you in those. One of the ones that Enfos really likes is this last approved only selection. And what that does is it takes your most recent plan. Many of you have been using Enfos for years, so you have many plans in the system. Using that last approved only is going to pull that most recent plan. All right, this is a really important one for bulk importing, but scenarios and expense types can have different settings. So if you've got one expense type that uses, one format and a different expense type that uses a different one, when you do a bulk import, it can make it much more challenging. Okay, so maybe, and really for the first times you're doing this, separate out your bulk imports by the scenario and expense type combinations, because those settings are going to match, almost exclusively. All right, all your projects can be imported at the same time, right? We just did one plan at one AOC. When we do bulk data migration, we are importing data for every single project at the same time. But we're only importing one plan per project. And this one really applies to historic data migration. If you're loading up a single plan for every year, you want to do them in order, right? 2022, then 2023, then 2024. So that would be 3 different import files. Many times, all of the data will fail in the import if Enfos is detecting any of these format or data errors. So your whole file might fail, even though not every single row has an error. So read those error messages, and they are very helpful. I am going to just show on the import logs one more time, going back into Enfos, where we have the import logs. We'll see an error message on the import page, but this middle button, this import log, and I'm going to go back to our import here. And if I go here, I can see many of my successes. You can see I was practicing ahead of this, but sometimes they fail, right? And if you do have a failure, you can always click on that ID. And then you can see what that error was. You can see for me, I had a currency mismatch at my project before I could import that. So I've cleaned up that error, and then I did it again, and it worked perfectly. So this import logs page is really great for troubleshooting when you get the errors. It's also really nice because it tells you the exact line of the error. And if it's not a format error, if it's specific to a column, it will tell you that column too. So they are very, very helpful. All righty. I'm going to go into the question and answer portion of the slide deck. There we are, questions and answers. Alexa, I'm going to let you chime in if there's additional items. If you are dropping from the webinar, just remember you are going to get that very short survey after this. And thank you for your time today. But we're going to open it up for questions. And please use the chat to add any additional questions in.
Sure, Tori, I have a couple here. How about, can you show what the column name should be if we plan for months instead of full years?
Yes, I can. Let me update my import file. So in my import format at the top, you can see that it is shows us the examples by years, by quarters, by months. And this gives us an example, but I'm going to build it out right now. Let me pull up my import file. Here we go. All right, so instead of 2024, I'm going to insert. I'll insert 4 here, and we'll show a few examples. All right, so I'm going to read my format, and it is the year parentheses. So I'm going to show something like 2024, and then I would say January, and then 2024, Feb. and it's the first 3 characters of the month. If I was doing quarter, it would be very similar, 2024 Q1. And I'm just going to check my format over here and make sure I have that right. I sure do. And then each column is, this is our month or this is our quarter, depending on what your settings are for that expense type scenario type. Instead of doing it by year, I will tell you by using that template, it's going to export it that way, which makes it super helpful.
All right, another one related to our file here. Can you clarify what the function of the initiator column is?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Initiator. Here we are. If I leave this blank, the initiator is going to default to whoever imports the file, right? And that can be okay. That's going to be me in my example, and maybe that's you, and that's great because you're importing the plan, and then you are the person who does the review and then submit it. But let's say we've got, you know, I'm an administrator and I'm importing this in bulk for many of my project managers. And I've got multiple AOCs and, you know, maybe Alexa manages one AOC and Tara manages another. So I can put in Alexa's contact information for the initiator for my first plan. And then, you know, for my second one, maybe Tara goes in. When I import the data, now Alexa and Tara are going to be listed as the contacts for that plan. So it's a way to save me a step and automatically put Alexa and Tara in if they belong as a contact to that plan. If their user preferences are set up, and let me come on over to my own user preferences here. For the planning module, if their user preferences are set up to include plans in the editing status, that means when they log in and take a look at their action items, they're going to see those plans that are listed for them as the initiators right on their action item dashboard, where then they can edit and review and add backup documents and, you know, submit it or pre-approve it onto the next step. So that initiator is very helpful if you're importing plans on behalf of other people and you want these other people to do that first review and approval. If you're like me here and, you know, you're building it out in Excel and then importing it and then doing that review, you can leave it blank.
All right, just one more quick one here. What system is the best for testing files before running them in production?
Yeah, I like to use the integration system. And I know some of you may or may not use that system that often. You might also have access that you might need from your own Enfos administrator, especially if you use single sign-on. For me, the production system URL is p.enfos, P for production. The integration is just i.enfos.com. And what that system is a weekly copy of your production data. So that copy happens on a Saturday. And here we are on Wednesday. So that data in the integration system now is 4 days old. And on Saturday, integration will be refreshed again with production system. So that integration system is really great for testing import files because the data is pretty recent, right? It's not today's data, but it's pretty recent. So it's great for testing. And then if you're happy with that test, then you can take your file and load it into production. I cannot talk about integration without warning you. People always forget. People will bookmark integration. They'll do all this work in integration. They'll see it. And then, you know, they'll maybe review and approve it. And their next approver, they'll say, how come you haven't approved my plans? And the next approver says, I don't see them. They're not in Enfos. And what you learn, what we figure out is that you did it in integration. You forgot to do it in production. So just remember, if you are using integration, it's a copy. Nothing goes over to production automatically. You're going to have to do it again in production. All right, so that is the end of our questions. If you have any others, please send them over either to your admin or to the Enfos support team. We're happy to help you through this. As I mentioned, we do this. This is how the Enfos team loads up your data in bulk, so we know it very well. If you've got any questions along the way, let us know. After this webinar finishes, there will be the slide deck sent out to you with very detailed instructions of what we talked about today. You'll also have the recording of this webinar. this webinar, as well as all of those other webinars I've talked about, all the other webinars we've recorded, they are all on the Enfos YouTube page. They're also on the new tab page within Enfos. Here they are, newest on the bottom. And then finally, be sure to do that survey at the end. Our marketing team loves it. They use the data. And yeah, please be honest with it. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. We appreciate it.